as you hear Ray and his presentation, think back to, isn't it interesting how life will change or go in one direction that you never really thought of, and why do certain things happen that are really, to this day, unexplained. Anyhow, enough of the tease here. Ray is involved in many different things. As a matter of fact, most of the items are in this handout in this pamphlet, so if you didn't get one, I've got plenty to go. I think you printed up about 35 of them. Real estate is the main line of what he does today, and he can probably get into more of that. But he sits on several military boards. One, he's a treasurer and board member of the Lutheran Hour Ministries, and that still is running. It's been running for a long time. In the Grand Canyon District, he's a member of the personnel board, the City of Glendale. That's got to be an exciting one. And member of the VFW, post number 1433. Sandy Cool. Is that person related to Laddie?
I think that was the original. Sandy Cool was the one that founded
that post. Okay.
Yeah, that post.
And then also the area director of Toastmasters. So we get all those skills mixed into one. And without further ado, Ray, it's yours.
Thank you. Bill spoke about a Cobra. I was never rated to fly Cobras, but I had the extreme experience to fly in one. As you guys know, the gunner sits in front of the pilot. So I flew gunner, and one of my buddies who was rated flew. He says, "Yeah, let's just go. I'll take you up for a ride." Wow, that was one of the rides of my life, I gotta tell you. At that time, the Cobra was the only rotary wing aircraft that could do a complete loop, an inverted loop. And now there's other rotary wing aircraft that can accomplish the same thing. But I have to tell you, that was really a thrill in my life back at that time. So, Bill asked me a few months ago if I would speak to you about an experience in Vietnam. I've had numerous experiences there, obviously, because I was there for 23 months and 17 days, but this particular experience kind of really is embedded deep within my soul. Now, as a Toastmaster, they always say, if you're going to engage the audience, start out with something humorous. So I'm going to share this with you. This is a transcript of a radio conversation between a U.S. naval ship and Canadian authorities off the coast of Newfoundland in October of 1995. The radio conversation, as transmitted on October 10th, 1995, is as follows. U.S. ship, please divert your course 5 degrees to the south to avoid a collision. Canadian reply, recommend you divert your course 15 degrees to the south to avoid a collision. U.S. ship, this is the captain of a U.S. Navy ship. I say again, divert your course. Canadian reply, no, I say again, you divert your course. U.S. ship, this is the aircraft carrier USS Coral Sea. We are a large warship of the United States Navy. Divert your course now. Canadian reply, this is the lighthouse. Your call. I wonder how that captain of that ship felt after he heard that, you know. Anyway. Well, as I mentioned a moment ago, this is a story that I have only told twice. And this is the third time. I told it a couple of times here within the last 2-3 months. After tonight, this is probably the last time that I will ever share this story with anyone. It's taken a long time for me to come around to even share this story. 48 years to be exact. But I thought it was fitting to at least share it once or twice. By the way, the United States government has declassified the details surrounding this incident, so we are not divulging anything that's classified. So we won't have the, FBI or somebody come in here and drag me out of here. It starts out, it was Sunday, April 4th, 1971. On the radio, people were listening to Just My Imagination by the Temptations. One of the highest viewed movies of that year was Valdez is Coming. And one of the best-selling books on the New York bestseller list was James Wambaugh's The New Centurions. Now the newspapers actually were filled with news stories about the My Lai massacre, which many of you are aware of, that occurred in May of 1968. By the way, Lieutenant William Calley was the only one that was ever tried, convicted, sent to prison, and there was a lot of controversy that surrounded that whole case, if you will. But then, before President Nixon left office in 1974, he gave a full pardon to Lieutenant William Calley. For me, I was in Dong Tam, South Vietnam. So here is where Dong Tam is. Here's where Saigon was. Now, I was down in Dong Tam for the last year that I was there in Vietnam. You can see this area up here. That's well known, commonly called the Parrot's Beak area. And you had, hope it didn't go out of me, Tay Ninh, and I was at Fire Base Quan Loy, and there was another mountain. There were like 3 mountains up there in that area. Quan Loy was only 7 clicks from the Cambodian border. And I was with the 1st Cav when I was up at Quan Loy. Quan Loy was the launching pad, if you will, when the United States moved into Cambodia in May of 1970. I was one of the first 1,000 guys that went there, and I spent basically 3 weeks in Cambodia. I was flying supplies and troops in and out and back and forth. But then after about 3 weeks, if you recall, the government called all of the U.S. forces back. They almost made it to Phnom Penh, but it was kind of like World War II when MacArthur was pulled back by the president. Well, kind of the same thing, because we didn't actually experience much resistance from the enemy, but for the most part, 3 weeks we were out. Shortly thereafter, the government turned Quan Loy base over to the ARVNs. ARVNs, South Vietnamese. EMU stands for Experimental Military Unit. Somebody had sat up all night thinking that one up.
But they forgot that emus can't fly.
But they can't fly. But I will say for the Australians, they are some of the best pilots in the world. I would fly anywhere on any day with them. So on that Sunday, I was called over to, oh, by the way, this is the patch that we were allowed to wear on our flight suits. I have my patch right here. Our colonel, my colonel, called me over, summoned me to his office on that Sunday morning. He wanted to discuss something. Now, let me share something with you. He was a full bird colonel. He was due to retire shortly. He knew he was not going to get his star. And he was okay with that. If you're ever going to work for a full bird colonel, that's the best kind. Because in talking with him for just 3 minutes, you already knew he was in retirement already. So we had a little discussion, and by the way, I inserted a few slides here. This is from the avionics tower here at Dongtam. Here are some of my fellow Australians, the Taipans, that did a flyover of Dongtam. I don't know what caused them to do that day, but you know, they were out having fun. Australians know how to party, and they know how to fly. And this here was more of a full shot of Dongtam Air Base. So I'm talking with the colonel, and while I'm talking with him, an alarm goes off at our station. Well, nothing unusual about that, because that happens. As it turned out, our first ship went out to rescue some Arvins about 20 miles from base. Nothing unusual until about an hour later when we received a second call. So since I was up, I grabbed the crew, grabbed their gear, and we loaded onto the backup Huey, and we flew out to the location that we were given. As we got closer, my suspicions, my fears were confirmed. Our first ship had crashed. But there was no time to grieve. We had a mission that we had to accomplish. We had to recover all of the bodies. I landed our Huey about 40 yards from the crash site, and we started to survey the wreckage. And after we recovered a couple of the bodies, we started taking some small arms fire. Now, we were in kind of a unique position because anytime we flew, we had 2 gunships that would accompany us. They're circling around above. As we took some ground fire, my crew chief, Sergeant Roach, Charles Roach, great guy from Texas, he immediately radioed the gunships, and they proceeded to lay down 30 caliber fire and fire some rockets into this tree line about 50 yards from us, where the small arms fire was coming from. Immediately, a few additional units from the 135th with ground troops showed up. The pilot here, who took my place on that first flight, Lieutenant Noel Charles LaPlante. And that has kind of haunted me my whole life, okay? Well, anyway, the ground troops secured the perimeter, and what they found were 2 NVA snipers dead. We spent the next few hours in recovering the remaining bodies, and there was a Chinook, an Army Chinook, that flew in with the crew to net out the wreckage. Obviously, you don't leave a wreckage. All of you guys that serve in Nam, you know you don't leave anything out there for Charlie to get, because they're going to try to use whatever they can against you. So they netted up the wreckage. And after everything was said and done, all of the bodies were recovered, I flew my crew back to base. And that's when it hit me. I had 40 days left in the United States Army. I had heard of these horror stories where guys would fly one more mission and never make it back. I had spent 23 months, 17 days there. I had already dropped one Huey. Luckily, it was into a rubber tree plantation, and that's why I'm standing here today. But the point of it is, I didn't want to push fate. I stormed into my colonel's office. Remember the one that I'm not going to get a star, that's already in retirement? I stormed into his office and I said, I got right in front of his desk, and I looked at him and I said, I don't care what you do to me. I am not going to fly any more missions. You are not going to get me in the cockpit of a Huey. I'm sorry. I don't care. And I ran it on for about 2 minutes, and finally he threw up his arms. He goes, Strahl! What, sir? You know how to drive a Jeep? That was kind of disarming. I said, what? He goes, do you know how to drive a Jeep? I said, yes, sir, I do. Good. You're going to be my driver until you leave country. So that's what I did for the last 40 days. I drove the colonel around and got to kind of hang out with the colonel. He wasn't really a bad guy. He was a great guy. But at any rate, at that point, the day came. And it was my time to leave Vietnam. My colonel actually flew me to the 90th Replacement Battalion in Ben Hoa. That's a little northwest of Saigon. That was where everybody left when they processed out of country. And my colonel landed his helicopter on the commanding general's helipad, where his driver was there to pick me up. He took my baggage, put it in the Jeep. I said my goodbyes to the colonel, and the driver took me out to, drove me out onto the tarmac, where there was a waiting United jet. Baggage handler took my duffel bag, and the driver handed me my military records, all my records in a big envelope. They had already processed me out of country. I didn't have to do that.
You shot records too.
Therefore, the words that the driver left with me says, have a good life and thank you for all that you have done here. But he said, make it mean something. Now you have to understand, those words kind of haunted me, because this is 40 years before the movie Saving Private Ryan. Remember Captain Miller, played by Tom Hanks, who said at the end, he says, earn this, when he said this to Private Ryan. Well, when I saw that movie, it kind of brought all of that back anyway. So I boarded the plane, headed to the States. I ETS'd out of Fort Dix, New Jersey, and then made my way, a flight to suburban Chicago. Grew up in a town of Elgin, Illinois. The town used to make watches. Now you'd think that that was probably the end of the story. Now, that's part of the story, and that's normally where it could end. Remember that statement about make your life mean something? I took about 3 weeks, I relaxed, I decided that this is what I needed to reflect upon. And by the way, Noel LaPlante, he's on the wall, panel 4W, line 106. And I was there, and it was kind of fitting, you have that photo, and Bill brought that rendering over there. And there's Noel's name. But I gave a lot of thought to that because it really had kind of, as I used this word before, it haunted me. So after 3 weeks, I said, well, I better start to move forward. So I contacted a headhunter downtown Chicago on Wacker Drive. And I said, look, I don't want just a job. I want a path to something greater than what I have already experienced. So he sat me down, he says, okay, I'm going to put you through this real big battery of tests, which he did. I have never taken so many tests in a short period of time in my entire life. But finally it was over. He said, okay, there's 2 things that you would be good at. Sit down. So I sat down, I said, all right, tell me. He said, well, the very first thing you would be really good at is a televangelist. Hallelujah. But the second thing, he said you'd be good at banking. Well, I chose the latter. And as I was starting my banking career, I also went to college simultaneously. For the next several years, I rose up through the ranks and became a vice president with Citigroup. And in 1993, I moved to Phoenix, where I continued my banking career. And I became vice president of business development for one of Arizona's largest direct mortgage lenders at that time. So during the past number of years, you know that statement, make your life mean something. I kept thinking, you know, I need to try to do more to give back. So consequently, I involved myself in a number of different organizations. VA Rep, Veteran Association of Real Estate Professionals. I'm a member of the VFW. I sit on the board of directors of WEMAR. WEMAR is the West Maricopa County Association of Realtors. I've been a member there for about 15 years. And of course, as Bill mentioned in the introduction, I also sit on the personnel board for the city of Glendale. I'm an Eagle and the president of our Fraternal Order of Eagles, Sunny Slope 2957, is sitting right over there. He's my best friend, and in fact, he was also my best man at my wedding, and his wife was Diana's maid of honor. And of course, Luthenauer Ministries. Well, let me share just a couple of points with you about VA Rep, because this is an organization that I am deeply involved in. VA Rep is a national nonprofit that has chapters all over the United States, and their main mission is to advocate for veterans and veterans' housing rights and veterans' benefits. Every year we have a policy conference in DC, where we spend a day on the Hill advocating and meeting with congressmen and women and senators and advocating for veterans' rights. At the National Convention back in 2017, it was held in Orlando. They put on a 8-hour certification class called the MVHC certification. It's the Military Veterans Housing Certification. Once you go through that 8-hour class and pass a test, then you're certified to actually sit down and work with veterans as far as their housing rights, and work with them in a number of different areas to kind of help them along. Well, at this 8-hour class, towards the end, the instructor, who's a friend of mine, he's with the chapter up in Las Vegas, Scott Robinson, he started to talk about how Vietnam veterans were treated when we returned. And how did that affect us? And he wanted some feedback from some folks in the room. There were 150 people in this class. Somebody handed me a microphone and I walked to the center of the room, and the first words out of my mouth were, "I'm a Vietnam veteran combat aviator." I was not prepared for what was going to happen next. Everybody stood up and gave me a standing ovation. That was probably one of my proudest moments right there. But after the applause died, I talked for 2 or 3 minutes about how we felt when we returned from Vietnam. And for the most part, Vietnam veterans, we wanted to give back, we wanted to contribute, we wanted to move on with our lives. And yes, we had all of that rhetoric, we had all of those comments and how we were looked down upon. Most of us just kind of put our head down, turned the page, moved into the next chapter in our lives. We wanted to do good, we wanted to give back, and that's basically what so many Vietnam veterans have done. And if you kind of look around you, there's so many of them that are involved in so many different charitable efforts today. Well, at the end of this class, I had several people that came up to me and shook my hand and said, "Hey, thank you for your service," all of this. And out of the corner of my eye, I see this guy. He's making a beeline for me. And he finally reaches me and he gives me a big hug. And he says, "Ray, I'm Bob Moody. Bob Moody and I flew some missions together out of Dongtan 47 years earlier. Bob is a successful real estate broker in South Florida. And so we spent a lot of time catching up there at that convention in Orlando. And again, this year the National Convention in October is in Orlando, so I'll have a chance to see Bob again. But the thing of it is that it's organizations like VA Rep that, I've given a lot, tried to give a lot back to, but they have given so much back to me. All of these organizations have given so much to me. And I am, let me just share something with you about Toastmasters. I was just appointed area director for Toastmasters this year. Now, Toastmasters is an organization that will help you become a better leader and a better speaker. I already had been a certified CE instructor for the state of Arizona, but I knew that I had kind of reached where I wasn't going to do anymore. So Toastmasters helped me break through and to be better than what I had as far as my speaking ability. One of the folks that I had the opportunity to mentor was a lady by the name of Lisa Raymond. And Lisa came aboard and she was like a sponge. You know, she just soaked up everything. And usually a mentor in Toastmasters is to help them with their first few speeches. Well, since then, she has gone on to become a division director. She sits on the state board. She, you know, incredible. Lisa Raymond is sitting in the back of the room right now. So the point of this is that VA rep, and I'll close this out here, just a couple of things about VA rep in particular for you veterans. One of the things that VA rep has been instrumental in this year has been the Blue Water Navy Vietnam Veterans Act of 2019. What that does is all of those guys, those service members that were on ships that never landed on Vietnam soil, they now will have all of the same benefits as anyone else. All right? They also, one of the other things that we did, they were instrumental in, is that there was usually a cap on VA loans, usually to match the conforming limit. I know, I don't want to get into mortgages and that, but basically with VA loans, there was a conforming limit. And once they had a loan that was at the top of that conforming limit, right now it's $484,100. What they did is they removed the cap. So there is no cap, no down payment on any VA loan, no matter what the size of that loan, which is going to help a lot of the doctors and JAG lawyers and senior officers that make a good income, so they don't have to do the 25% of the entitlement and that whole calculation and that. They don't have that going on anymore. That's going to be there as far as January 1st. The last thing on this is the fact that right now in Congress, VA rep is working with Congress to get it passed that veterans will be a protected class. Now what does that mean? Well, for government monitoring purposes, that is huge. That will give them a voice. That will give veterans a voice that they didn't have before, because anytime, let's say you wanted to get a VA loan and say, well, I want to use my VA benefits. Guess what? The lender says, or the realtor says, why don't we try an FHA or a conventional loan, and try to steer them away from using their veteran benefits. That data had never been tracked. No one ever had any data on that. But now, with HMDA, we'll be able to track that data, and that'll give us the ammunition to say, okay, Congress, here you go. We have the data. Now, let's do something. Also, the Fair Housing Act of 2019, that is being passed. VA rep was very instrumental in that. So not to go on and on about VA rep, excuse me, but it's an organization that does a lot in advocating for you as veterans, and we will continue to do that. So I thank you this evening for allowing me to come here and share this story with you about one of my experiences in Vietnam. I've had many, 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 many experiences, but this one was the one that I will take to my grave, because Noel took my place on that first call. And we paid the ultimate price. By the way, people might ask, how come that chopper crashed? One of the Arvins did not clear his M79 grenade launcher and accidentally it discharged right up through the rotor hub. And when that happens, a Huey becomes a brick. And unfortunately, that's what happened.
So it was really friendly fire, by accident.
Yeah, yeah. So, at any rate, thank you so very much
Well, I'd like to
for
tell you-
letting me.
I'd like to tell you you're gonna get off easy, but it doesn't work that way. I got a couple questions for you, and one of the questions was kind of set from your perspective when you entered the country. Where was the nation in support of the Vietnam War?
I got in country in '69. I was there 69 to 71. And as you know, in 1969, the United States was a little bit in support. Nixon was still, was president. They were still a little bit in support, but between 1970, 71, Kent State, all of that, that's what really turned the tide. And that's what really turned America, if you will, against the United States Armed Forces. And so from that standpoint, we still had a little bit of support, but for the most part, we were losing it.
Well, we also had political issues with the government. There was a constant role of governmental control in the South Vietnamese, and that became kind of an issue too as far as stability. But one of the things that we saw over here that you wouldn't have witnessed until you got home was it was on our televisions every frickin' night.
Yep.
The napalm.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and so you got a big dose of that coming over. I've heard several things about the ARVN troops on whether or not they would support us, we would support them. Obviously, we were fighting together. How was the ARVN support that you saw, unless you got into special forces, from your end of it?
ARVN support, is probably somewhat like trying to teach the Iraqis how to stand up and fight for themselves. And let me explain that. The ARVNs, they just didn't know. They just didn't have the will. They wanted the Americans to fight their war for them. And that's what we did for a number of years. But when we started to turn bases over, such as Quan Loy, we were there, when we turned it over to the ARVNs, it was about 7 months after that, but they had some real issues. Charlie came in and took over Quan Loy. Now, Quan Loy was an area where it was a resort area for the French back in the 20s and 30s. And they had a lot of these old French provincial buildings there that we used for, government or military use. But again, the point is that they just didn't have the stamina and the moxie to stand up and fight their own battle. And that was really a shame. That was really a shame. They wanted us to fight their battles. In a combat zone, you do what you can to extract information because lives are at stake. All right? One of the things that the Australians came up with this one. He said, okay, they'd get a NVA sympathizer and they'd blindfold him and they'd throw him in a Huey and they'd take off flying and then they'd come back in and they would hover about 3 feet off of the ground. But the guy in the blindfold didn't know And so we had an interpreter there, you know, trying to ask them, you know, troop movements and, you know, what's going on and all of this. And if they didn't answer the question, they would push them out of the helicopter. Well, I only fell 3 feet. But the thing was, they thought they were dead, right? But I've seen that happen a couple, 3 times, you know. I said,
amazing
boy, you really kind of take it to the limit, don't you? Yeah, let's go have a beer. Yeah, so but that was something really interesting. Yes, Sandy.
What, you said you were there for 23 months. What did you do? What was your job? What was your mission before you went on that helicopter?
Well, actually, I had flight school at Fort Rucker, and I had the extreme honor after I came out of flight school. They always say it's who you know. Apparently, I knew a couple of people, and I became permanent party at Fort Rucker, Alabama, and I was one of the guys that flew on Flatiron, which is the code name for the Army Aviation Rescue Team. Now, any given time, there are only 15 guys that ever fly on Flatiron, and I flew on Flatiron for about 6 months, and that was out of Cairns Field. We had white Hueys with red crosses, and anytime we went anywhere, they know who we were. In fact, we did get a call before I went to Nam. Remember Hurricane Camille and in Biloxi, Mississippi? We spent 3 days over there in rescue efforts. So, but I was there for about 6 months. And I felt really kind of bad because all the guys I came out of flight school with, you know, they're going to Nam. And I kept putting, you know, come down on levee, let's see, I want to go to Japan, I want to go to Germany, I want to go to Hawaii. I wasn't going anywhere. Finally, I felt so guilty, I said, okay, Japan, Germany, Vietnam. Boom, next month I came down on levee for Vietnam. So that's what actually happened. But and when I got back, I had just missed it by about 1.5 to 2 years, because when I got back, there was really no demand for Huey pilots. It was before Flight for Life. It was before a lot of news choppers, all of that. So you're not just going to hang out there because you don't know what's going to happen. And when I went into, you know, my other career, I said, geez, I want to do something less bloodletting than what I just came out of. Well, banking, I was really sorely mistaken there, because there's been a lot of bloodlet in the banking industry over the last 40 years. So, if you don't mind, I have something here for you.
Sure. And I have something for you.
Oh, well, thank you. I talked a little bit about VA rep, and every year our gala that we usually have in April, and it's our main fundraiser for the year, for funds to help veterans. By the way, one thing I didn't mention, VA rep nationally to date has given out about 50 mortgage-free homes to deserving veterans. 3 of those right here at Phoenix. And so consequently, every year we have a new challenge coin that we do. And I wanted to present you with this one to keep in your pocket. And by the way, I always keep mine with me at all times. It's in my pocket. But this here is the Veteran Association of Real Estate Professionals. On the one side, it has
Okay.
it has the insignias of all 5 branches,
Right.
and the VA. On the other side, our main speaker this year was Peter McDonald, which is one of the remaining 4 Navajo code talkers. Since January, they have lost 4, and there's only 4 left. And Peter McDonald is probably the youngest one of the lot. He's 91 years old. But we also, this year, had put the Navajo symbols on there
Oh, that looks
as
nice.
well. So
Thank you.
the way we do
You
that,
good? Yeah.
that's right. There's the case for it. Thank you, Bill.
I'm gonna pass this around so you can take a look at it. Okay. I notice it's bigger than our coin. Yeah, I've got mine already.
Yeah, VA rep spends a lot of money on that.
Okay, I've got a certificate of appreciation awarded to Ray Strahl for being an outstanding presenter of our military history, awarded this 25th day of July, 2019.
Thank you so much, Bill. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you.